Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. And today we have with us Ayya Brahmavara to my right and Bhante Sanatavahari to my left. And my name is Bhante Sudaso. And this is our weekly monk chat session, your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism, and there's a possibility we might respond. And we prioritize questions. So if you want an answer, it's better to phrase it in the form of a question. And we'll take things in more or less the order that they appear. And when the flow of questions stops, then the live stream will also stop. So if you want us to keep going, then keep putting in questions. So we'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start going through the questions. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Okay, so hello to all the people who have checked in so far. So hello to Rick, Joseph, Vivian, Kim, Louisa, Elenisa, Julie, Karuna, Suzanne, Margaret, Rupal, Jayanta, Daniel, Yankee, Kumu, Sud, and IP. Good to see all of you online. And also to Ian and Manal, who are here at the monastery with us. And I see a few questions so far, so we'll go ahead and start with the first one. So Joseph says, how are you doing? I'm curious what your favorite ways are to forgive the past, bless the future, and appreciate the present. What's something you're grateful for? Ayya Brahmavara?
Well, where to begin? I'm grateful for this human life and this opportunity to practice the Dhamma. And, grateful for having stumbled across really, the teachings of the Buddha. I'm grateful for my parents. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful for the Sangha. I'm grateful to be able to be a bhikkhuni in this day and age. And I'm grateful for the teachings from the Buddha that enable us to forgive and to make peace with the past. Because this is really important, Joseph, isn't it? And how to forgive the past, bless the future, and appreciate the present. My sense is mindfulness. My sense is following the teachings enables this to happen quite naturally. So it's like forgiveness of the past doesn't have to be a kind of grit your teeth and force yourself to forgive experience. It doesn't work anyway. If we try and do that, we have to work through, isn't it, the suffering. And so for me, the mindfulness practice and the insight practices that we have and the ways in which we're encouraged to face our suffering means that we can make peace with pain and we can therefore forgive naturally and fully and completely. So I think this is really a wonderful thing. And in this way, we can make the future it's brighter as a result of our practice. As the heart purifies, the future kind of really takes care of itself. And the present moment also is actually, of course, in a way, all we have, all there is, and we can fully make the most of the present moment when we're practicing the Buddhist teachings. So that's just a sort of answer to your question.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
And next we have a question here. So Daniel asks, he says, I'm having trouble understanding the first in the 12 links of dependent origination. How does ignorance condition formations? So, well, whenever we start talking about paticca samuppada, there's always a million different opinions. I guess I should use the sutta hyperbole. There's always 500 different opinions. And 500 different ways of interpreting things. And here's if we wind up talking for 500 hours. So it's just the nature of the topic. It's actually a very complex and profound subject. And there's not really short, simple, direct answers. I remember when I first started giving Dhamma talks in New York City, people kept asking me to give a Dhamma talk about paticca samuppada, and I said, actually refused. I said, I won't give a Dhamma talk if I have less than 3 hours. Like other topics I can cover in 20 minutes, but you want me to talk about that one, I need at least 3 hours. So that said, I'm going to give a short answer to your question. So the first line of paticca samuppada is, in most places, in some places in the suttas it's different, but in most places it's avijja paccaya sankhara. So it's 3 words that we need to understand. So the first one, avijja, literally means a lack of knowledge. And vijja in the Pali texts, it has 2 main meanings. One is in a more ordinary sense of meaning a body of information, a bit similar to how we would use the word science these days, but not in the strictly limited sense that we use the word science, but in the broader sense of meaning a body of knowledge or a body of lore about something. And the other is in a more specifically spiritual sense. The term vijja means true knowledge or a deep, wise spiritual understanding of the true nature of reality. And that's the sense that's meant here when we say avijja. So avijja means a lack of deep, profound wisdom, lack of this true spiritual knowledge. And it's further defined in usually in one of 2 ways. Actually, there's 3 ways it's usually defined. So one is not really understanding the Four Noble Truths. And this means on a deep level. So not can you recite the Four Noble Truths, but rather do you actually clearly see the operating of the Four Noble Truths in your daily life? The second way it's commonly explained is not knowing the 3 characteristics. So knowing that everything is impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal, anicca, dukkha, anatta. And the third is defined in terms of rejection of karma and rebirth. So it's given through a rather long list of wrong views, which are basically all on the theme of karma and rebirth. So based upon this avijja, so not understanding the Four Noble Truths, not understanding the 3 universal characteristics, not understanding how karma and rebirth operate, then paccaya is usually translated as dependent. It also has the meaning of condition. The literal meaning of it actually means going back to. So from the prefix patti, which means back, and the verb aya, which means going. So paccaya means going back or returning, or based upon might be a way we would say it. So based upon this ignorance, the spiritual ignorance, then there are sankharas. And then we have to talk about sankhara, which is one of these words for which there is no single satisfactory English translation. And it depends entirely on the context. So the word sankhara, it has a few different common meanings. One meaning is a rather limited and specific sense of meaning mental activities, mental conditions. So in the 5 khandhas, that's the meaning of it. Another meaning of sankhara is in a much broader sense of meaning any conditional phenomena, any distinct thing of any sort can be called the sankhara. By the way, just for the record, the word sankhara does not mean choice. I have to say that because these days you'll start to see it written as choice in some places. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean choice. It means either a thing in the broadest possible meaning of the word, or it means mental object, mental activity, mental condition. But it doesn't mean choice. That's much too narrow or limited of a word. So Avijja Paccaya Sankhara, so based upon ignorance or dependent upon this basic lack of spiritual understanding, this basic foolishness, then conditioned upon that, there are sankharas. So sankhara is based upon ignorance. So what is sankhara here? So if we take it in the sense of mental activities or mental conditions, then it's talking about the kind of mental activities and conditions which are based upon a misunderstanding of reality, which then leads to us making choices that augment our dukkha rather than decrease it. That would be a very basic and limited understanding of avijja paccaya sankhara. Another way of understanding it is that because of not understanding impermanence, not understanding emptiness, basically, not understanding the insubstantiality of all things, the impersonal nature of all things, then we generate the experience of sankharas. We generate the concept of distinct separate objects. So this is a much deeper, more profound way of understanding this first step. So based upon an ignorance of the inherently impermanent, insubstantial, and empty nature of phenomena, we generate the concept of objects, of I am the monk sitting here, looking at that person sitting over there, in this room, in this town, in this country, in this state of being. So we generate this whole manufactured reality, this whole delusional reality, which we then inhabit and we think is real. And this actually, I think, is much closer to the intended meaning. The Buddha is talking in Paticca he's talking about how, based upon our fundamental delusion and ignorance and foolishness, we manufacture a false and painful experience for ourselves in each moment. So I think that sankhara here is being used in that broadest sense of the generation of mental concepts of separate objects as being real and distinct phenomena. Because that's actually the basic problem of all of our suffering. It's coming from this basic misunderstanding of the emptiness of phenomena. Those are my thoughts anyway. So as I mentioned, if we start talking about Paticca Samuppada, we'll be talking for about 500 hours. Unless one of the venerables want to add something? No? Okay. 500 hours? Do you want to talk for 500 hours? No? Okay. Okay, moving on. That was my attempt to give a short answer.
That's great.
But it wasn't very short. Okay, so Louisa says, I watched an Ajahn Brahm video and he defines samadhi as stillness, whereas Bhikkhu Bodhi defines it as concentration. What do you think? A mixture of both? Bhante, what do you think?
I like stillness. Is very nice. For me, it works when I try to work because I have some cultural bias with the word concentration. I grew up in an environment where concentration is negative, like concentrate. And, it's it has a negative connotation. So that's just for me, it's a cultural thing. So I go with stillness of body, stillness of mind, stillness of thoughts and everything.
Okay. And Eric says, is there a point in my practice where I should be differentiating between Mahayana and Theravada practice? I have been practicing for 2 years and took refuge vows 1 year ago in Mahayana tradition. What do you think?
Differentiating, not necessarily. I mean, just whatever's useful for you. The Theravada tradition, the Mahayana tradition, come from the same source, and a lot of monastics that I know, we like to refer back to the early Buddhist teachings, and those teachings of the Buddha, of course, predate all of these later developments, and so I feel there's a lot there for us, a lot of support for our practice when we really come back to the source as much as possible, as much as we're able. But there are these wonderful varieties in these different traditions, ways of practicing that, then we can rejoice in that, because it's like there's something for everyone. We can find our place, It's like for some people, the Tibetan tradition really supports their practice, meets their needs, and for others, the simplicity of Theravada may work very well, or the discipline of Zen, the teachings of Chan tradition, and so forth. And I think it's great to have a degree of openness, to receive teachings wherever we can, listen to different teachers from different traditions, and see where you can find the Dharma and make it your own, So I would say there's no shoulds, really. There's no need to differentiate between these different traditions, but rather to take what's useful for your own development, your own experiential practice, and put all of that into practice. And anything that you come across that seems doesn't quite have the flavor of Dharma, then you can actually put it aside, as the Buddha advised us, not to take anything on board that doesn't really resonate and that we can't put into practice and experience for ourselves. So that would be my response.
Wonderful. And Ayadamadeepa is joining in. So hello, Venerable. It's so lovely to see you joining in online. And there's a question here from Julie. So Julie says, when the Buddha became the Buddha, who did he go to for refuge? What about the Arhants? Who did they go to for refuge? Well, the Buddha, prior to attaining awakening, he had some other spiritual teachers who were teaching different ways of training the mind through forms of meditation, and particularly through very extreme forms of asceticism. But eventually the Buddha realized, well, the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, he realized that wasn't working. So he set out to practice on his own for a while. And eventually he attained awakening through a deep insight that arose during meditation practice. So at that time, since he was the first Buddha that had appeared in a while, the previous one was a very long time ago, then he didn't have any person to go to for refuge. But what he had was the Dhamma itself that he had discovered. So that was his refuge. His refuge was the Dhamma itself, this fundamental truth of reality. That was the Buddha's refuge. As for the Arhants, so all of the Arhants started off as disciples of the Buddha. So they went to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha for refuge, just as the rest of us do. This is actually the basic foundation of Buddhist practice, is refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And Ascetic Gang says, which robe colors are not allowed? Bhante, you get an easy one.
Basically, any not like orangey color. You see brown, but it's orangey brown. If you see yellow, but it's always kind of orangey. But like black, green, blue, like those non-leafy colors.
Yep. And Julie says, can you please offer some examples of the differences between Anagami and Arhat in relation to experiences in lay life, what that would look like? Aya?
What would that look like? It makes me laugh, because they say you have to be one to know, How would it look? I mean, according to what I understand from the Buddha's descriptions of these levels of spiritual attainment, and Anagami still has some degree of defilement in the mind. So there is still some conceit, some maybe self-referencing in some very, very subtle, nuanced ways. There may be some agitation in the mind. So there's still some work to be done. But such a person would be living a very probably simple and pure life. As a layperson, I don't really know, because my sense is that these spiritual attainments are, in worldly terms, they're quite invisible, really. So one would certainly be living a life that's free from any kind of harmfulness. there would be some kind of dedication to spiritual practice that may be apparent to others. There may be some degree of sharing of those spiritual practices, but not necessarily. The difference between an anagami and an arahant is, as we know, somebody who's completely free from any kind of defilements, any kind of confusion, any kind of suffering. So such a person, I guess we would perceive as even-minded, as calm, as unreactive, somebody who you would never see such a person reveal or express any kind of anger, any kind of hostility, any kind of greed. When eating, such a person would be just eating, what's needed to keep the body going with absolutely no fuss, Actually, in some ways, one could say such people we may perceive as very ordinary, very normal people. Actually, it's very normal to be harmless. It's very normal to be calm and peaceful. We could say that you could say that the rest of us are running around like crazy, getting stressed for no reason and full of agitation and reactivity. But a person who's spiritually attained in these ways would be just normal, just calm and kind, relentlessly kind. So these are just a few thoughts on the topic.
And there's also a bit more. So Julie also says, as a Sakadagami or an Agami, is it possible to be in a romantic committed relationship? Especially when seeing the three characteristics, it seems at odds to be in this type of relationship at a certain point on the path. Well, an Agami, by definition, is completely free of all forms of sensual desire. So according to the suttas, an agami is naturally celibate. So they would not have any interest whatsoever in sexual activity. So romantic relationship, if by romantic you necessarily mean sexual, then the answer is no. But in terms of a committed relationship of having some kind of vow of companionship and responsibility to another person, yes, that's possible. There's an interesting case mentioned, I don't remember if it's in the suttas or in the commentaries, but there was a married couple and one of them became a non-returner, an anagami, and basically said that I'm going to be celibate now, and if you don't like that, then I'll help you find a new spouse. But if you're comfortable with that, then I'll keep supporting you and taking care of you and looking after you for the rest of your life. But it was very clear. This person was saying, like, now that I'm an agami, it's not possible for me to have a sexual relationship anymore. For a sakadagami, though, so this is actually not really well explained in the suttas. So the once returner is defined as someone whose sensual desire is vastly reduced, but not completely eliminated. So could a once returner still have a sexual relationship? I think it's theoretically possible, but they would probably be much less interested than most people, just because their sensual desire would be so greatly reduced. So I don't think it's impossible for them to be involved in a sexual relationship. I just think that they would have very little interest because their mind just wouldn't incline in that direction. Those are my thoughts anyway. And Rick says, can you share some reflections on how unskillful perceptions of time create dukkha and how skillful perceptions of time help to reduce suffering? Bhante, what do you think?
So in my experience, the most unskillful kind of perception of time that we have is like eternalism, that this moment, this experience, this pain, this suffering, this affliction, anger, anxiety is going to last forever. I mean, that's a common symptom you see with people who are suffering from like depressive episodes and anxiety or just a lot of pain, even physical pain. So that kind of misperception of time, seeing the anicca as nicca, seeing that impermanent as permanent, as the Buddha said, brings suffering. So anytime we see even the pleasant things, it's more subtle because we like the pleasurable things. But it's very obvious when we look at the painful things, and it brings us hopelessness sometimes, and it leads sometimes to some unskillful kind of thinking about how to end this thing that seems permanent. I want to end this permanent way. Usually, people resort to physical means to try to escape it. But I think that, in my experience, is the one we need to be more careful with, is thinking anything that is impermanent, taking it as permanent. So whatever you're experiencing right now, especially if it's suffering, it's not permanent, it's impermanent.
Great, good. And Shadow of Label asks, do monks believe in chi or prana? Prana, since it originated in India, and chi regarding mixing with Taoism in China and Southeast Asia. Ayabi, what do you think?
Believing in chi or prana, I guess we don't believe in chi or prana, but I don't really feel qualified to say much about chi or prana, because they're very respected terms in their own traditions where they're used, and I'm sure that we could, if we investigated, find some kind of integration of these understandings into Buddhism. What would the equivalent be in Buddhism? Energy or life energy, maybe. We don't study chi or prana, but I guess we can experience these things. And the Buddha spoke a lot about energy, about effort, and the right kind of effort, and like how to work with imbalances in our energy. And for instance, restlessness, the hindrance of restlessness is, you could say it's an over emphasis or too much energy, maybe too high chi or prana, but I don't really know what those terms actually fully mean. But you could say restlessness, the hindrance, is an imbalance of energy. Sloth and torpor is an imbalance of energy. On the other side of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum, energy is too low, energy needs to be brought up. So a lot of our practice involves noting, how is the energy right now? And how can we balance things so that we are alert, but we're not restless, we're not over-energized, we're not slothful, sleepy, and so forth. So that's all I can really usefully say on the topic, and I hope it is on topic for you.
Thank you. And Kumu says, what is the significance of the orange-brown color for robes? Well, it's not actually particularly profound. So I remember a meeting with a group of Catholic monks in Italy a few months ago, and they were explaining to us like how every single component of their robes had a spiritual significance. They were like the 3 knots in the belt signifies the 3 forms of God, like the Trinity, and like the shape of the belt, also like in the like every single thing had some like spiritual significance. And then they were like, "What about your robes? Why is it brown?" And we're like, about that. So when you want to give some answer, like it demonstrates the emptiness of all phenomena, but actually it's just dirt. So what are our robes? Our robes are a very simple, cheap color, which is very easy to make using very cheaply available ingredients. So basically you can go into the forest and take some bark or some wood or some mushrooms or roots. Like there's lots of different simple plant matter. You can put it in some hot water and boil it for a little while, and you have brown cloth dye. So brown dye is one of the easiest colors to obtain, simply using natural materials. It's also because we traditionally we would make our robes out of rags. So taking dirty rags from garbage heaps or graveyards. Back in those days, people would just they'd wrap a dead body in cloth and then just throw it outside the village, which I think is great. I wish we still did that these days. And it was considered acceptable for monks to go and take the wrapping cloth from the dead bodies, which again, I think is just amazing. Like this is one of those ancient customs I wish we still had. Anyway, so you get these like old, like filthy stained bits of cloth, and then you would wash them, but they would still have stains in them. So then you dye it something that already looks like it's dirty and stained. So all the stains just kind of blend in with the muddy brown color. So it's also very practical in that sense. It's also really just practical, I have to say. Like, you get your robes dirty, and well, no problem, because they're already the color of dirt. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah, so I was a little bit embarrassed. The Catholic monks asking us about our robes, and it's not the most inspiring stories. A simple answer, though, is it's the color of humility, because we are in fact beggars. So the word bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, it means beggar, mendicant. We're deliberately becoming poor. We're deliberately becoming outcasts. So accordingly, we wear the cheapest, humblest color. So that's the basic meaning of this. Scott says, in interactions, we may come across arguments as to what reality is. When hostility is involved, we as new practitioners may be shaken. How to proceed?
Bhante, I think it's the Chula Vyuha Sutta, right? Where the Buddha talks about all these different views and how people come into conflicts and that we should avoid. Oh, the Vyuha Sutta. It's like one of those two. Vyuha for sure I know is called that. And he talks about how people come to conclusions and they're arguing and it's very poetic. And basically it's like, don't be attached to views. That's the end of it, right? So if someone wants to argue, let them talk, and you just have to be quiet. I love this kind of joke that goes around in spiritual circles. It gives an account of like two people. It's like someone comes up to him and says like, oh, what's your opinion about like truth or about arguing with people? And he says, basically when someone says something, I just, how does it go? Oh, I forgot it right now. It escaped my mind.
You just say like, oh, you're right.
Yeah, you're right. And the person says, I disagree. And then you go, oh yeah, you're right. Just give the person the reason, and so then just kind of live a peaceful, nonviolent life. Nonviolence also has to do with speech and mind and not coming into arguments with others. So usually when we argue back or we want to prove a point is that we have like we're trying to defend ourselves or defend our culture or defend something where, we're threatened by someone else's view. But why should you be threatened if you really know your view, if you've experienced it, right? Gone beyond belief. There's no reason to be threatened. But the reason you're arguing back is because you feel threatened. So there's something in your view. There's some weakness in your view. So you should go investigate that. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to go study and investigate why I feel threatened by other views.
Yeah, I find it can be helpful just to say something like, oh, that's really interesting. Please tell me more. Please tell me more about how you see this or what your opinion is. Or so rather than responding in a hostile way, just take it as like anthropological research. Like, you're not trying to change the other person. You're just trying to understand their experience. Well, that doesn't mean you agree with them. But actually, if you just show interest in what they're saying and really pay attention and listen, then usually the other person will stop being hostile. And at some point, they'll have said what they want to say, and then you can talk about something else. If it's another Buddhist person, however, who is actually really asking for your opinion on something related to the Buddhist view of things, then that can be a little bit more challenging. So then you need to know when it's actually the right time to speak, and when it's just not going to be productive, and it's better just not to go there. And Rick says, frequently the mind is impacted by strong symptoms of exhaustion, pain, or illness. What are skillful means to cope? How these distort our perceptions and increase greed, aversion, and delusion?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really wonderful just to notice that, isn't it? To actually be aware that when I'm tired, I can be grumpy and tetchy. It's time to be really aware, really, really mindful about the possibility that I might be more reactive at such times as when we're exhausted, in pain, or actually unwell. It's a time when all these experiences are times when the mind will tend to dwell more in negative, dark thoughts, difficult thoughts, painful emotions. And I think honestly to be aware of that is so wonderful, because then we can be on guard and we can protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And at such times it's really helpful to not focus so much on communicating and connecting and speaking and acting, but rather to taking care of the situation that we're assailed with, this afflicted situation. Can we kindly turn our attention to that and try and make time, try and have solitude, try and find space to heal and to really pay attention to what's happening. And this kindness and compassion then will, enable us to move through. And the kindness and compassion that we can generate, manifest towards ourselves, will of course be also the way that we relate to others. So yeah, a lot of metta. This is a time for metta practice, for wishing oneself well, for bringing up kindness in the heart, to soften the experience, and to quite naturally develop compassion through mindfulness of the suffering that's happening. Compassion is the result of this mindfulness. And so great care at such times, to look after ourselves first of all, and also to be careful not to allow our suffering to spill over, and cause any problems for others.
Great. And Shadow of Label says, Aya, you helped change my life with your in-depth answers. So you have a fan.
Thank you.
Actually, you have many fans. I'm also your fan.
Mutual fandom.
Yeah. And Kumu says, Dhammadina Terry was an arhat. That's correct. And Vishaka, her spouse during lay life, was an anagami, right? I think that's right. That sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Shadow of Label has another question. It said, Aya, how does a girl need to deal with celibacy? I took a vow yesterday.
Good for you. Oh, that's wonderful. It's good to take vows of celibacy. It's good to take vows of any kind of renunciation, or a kind of intentionality around doing good, avoiding harm. And also around meditation practice. That's a really good vow. I vow to meditate, every day, morning and evening, for however long I can. That's a good vow. So you've taken a vow of celibacy today. It's good to be, willing to challenge ourselves, and to be willing to let go of certain ways of behaving, so as to simplify our lives and to give us more peace, more calm in our lives. So great. So how to deal with it? Well, just keep the vow for as long as you'd like to keep the vow, and observe. When we practice celibacy, we get the opportunity to observe sexual energy without actually acting on it. This is fantastic. Sexual energy is like life energy. It's vitality of a sort, and there's a degree of momentum to it, a sort of wish to reach out maybe and fulfill that energy and find some sort of completion for that energy in a physical sense. But actually, if we can be present with this energy, sexual energy, we can observe that it's just energy. It's prana or chi maybe, I don't know, but it's just energy, and we can sit and we can observe it, and we don't have to be slaves to this energy. We don't have to be afflicted by it. We just observe the flow. It's actually rather wonderful. It's like, I've got a dose of life energy today. This is fantastic. Let's see where it goes. If it becomes very focused in the kind of genital area, we can just pay attention to something else, and we can actually observe this energy flowing around the body. We can focus on the hands or the head or the feet, and it'll be there. And we can actually allow this energy to move through. And my experience of celibacy is that it's very energizing, because it's like this energy it's not released in sexual release. It's rather kind of contained. And my sense is it becomes something like sublimated. It's like it transforms into life energy, into vitality. It's really good for the body. It's really good for the mind to work with sexual energy without being flowing in it without being identified with it. It's natural, it's just life energy of a certain sort. And so to observe celibacy, practice celibacy, gives this opportunity for sexual energy to be observed, to be witnessed without acting upon it. I really recommend this for anybody, and I celebrate that you've taken this vow today. And let's remember that, it's not necessarily a life vow. When we make these kind of determinations, we can be very wise and sort of gauge, how long shall I try this for? If one is in a relationship, for instance, it's only kind to discuss with one's partner and to not just sort of cut them off in this way, but to maybe have a time span, something like that, and to investigate for that time, and then to revert to letting go of the vow maybe, and then maybe bringing it back and so forth. So to work with our determinations in a kind way, not to overexert, not to kind of, not to give ourselves a challenge that's difficult to meet, so that we feel disappointed and judgmental about not managing to keep our vow, but rather to have a lot of kindness, a lot of wisdom, a lot of assessment around it, so that we test ourselves just this much. It's all about being one's own teacher, getting to know this body and mind and what's doable and what's realistic in this moment. So that's just a few words about your vow, and sadhu, good wishes for that.
And Shadow of Label also asks, how do you monks deal with heavenly feelings during meditation? An example, when in a dream state, you can still feel and sense your body, but still be in a dream. I have to admit, I don't really understand what you're talking about when you're talking about dream states. So in dream states, the mind is normally quite blurry and unclear, or it's quite delusional. So what I actually usually would recommend with dream states is don't worry about them. Just write it out, and when you wake up, then you can do your meditation practice. But dreams, especially in Theravada Buddhism, dreams are not really considered to be anything much important, not really worth making an issue out of. As for heavenly feelings during meditation, well, it really depends on what you mean by the word heavenly. So if by heavenly you just mean very pleasant, well, then you just observe pleasant sensation. Stay with your meditation object and recognize that pleasant sensations are just a natural function of the body-mind. Actually, when your concentration is becoming strong, then it's actually normal that you will start to feel very pleasant sensation. Your body-mind will start to feel really good. So that isn't a problem. It actually can be a sign that your meditation is progressing well. But it's also temporary and impermanent, like everything else. So if it diminishes, then don't worry about it. That's also perfectly natural for these things to come and go. Those are my thoughts anyway. And Rick asks, is a layperson living an inspired practice considered to be a spiritual or religious person?
Yes.
Okay, that was too easy. You needed one. Jojo says, I've heard very conflicting things in the Buddhist community on how to achieve samadhi. On one hand, in the suttas, it says that faith and mostly virtuous character will do it, but I see monastics encouraging bare mindfulness, and you can mindfulness yourself into samadhi and good meditation. Which is it? So is it faith and virtue, or is it mindfulness? What gets you into samadhi?
Any wholesome state. Just develop wholesome states. There's so many ways through the, Brahma Viharas, or through the practice of Anapanasati, or just through listening to like the Dhamma. Sometimes you can get samadhi. So the key is developing wholesome states for me. Yeah.
Okay. And I think this is a good one for IAB. This says, what are your thoughts on a person following the Dhamma plus the Bible?
Oh, Bante refers this question to me because I was brought up Catholic, and I was very devoted to Jesus when I was young, when I was a child, and that devotion has really stayed with me. So I see Jesus as a great teacher, a great example for us, particularly of loving kindness and forgiveness. And so my sense is, if you have an affinity with the Bible or parts of the Bible, if you're interested in looking at the Bible, there's a lot of good Dharma in there. There's an awful lot of other things like stories and history and cultural, all sorts of information. But there is some good Dharma in there too, of course. And there are the Gospels giving us some information about the ministry of Jesus. And within the Gospels, there is great Dharma. So, one could, I would say, use, scriptures, religious scriptures, for inspiration, for guidance, particularly the Buddha's teachings, for guidance, how to practice for liberation. And then we put them into practice. So I personally read every day what the Christians call lectio, to do some divine reading, to read the Pali Canon every day, to read some suttas. And then I sort of take it in a very relaxed way. One could do the same with the Bible. Take in some passage, some reading, or go to Mass and listen to the readings, and just purely listen is my way of contemplating teachings. This is just an example. So to hear, to listen very fully, very respectfully, not to be doing anything else at the same time, to be fully attending to these teachings that are worthy of great respect, and then to meditate, and then to sit, and to let the teachings go and just see how these teachings inform our practice. So this is a really valuable way to receive the Buddha's teachings, or to receive the words of Jesus, particularly the New Testament, I would say, when looking at the Bible. But indeed, there are also passages in the Old Testament, Proverbs, wisdom. There are many sections that are full of good teachings that we can receive and contemplate. I spent time in a Benedictine monastery over years, and I'd go visit and go to all the different services, and they would recite the Psalms in this monastery. So they're going through the Psalms year after year, over and over and over again, reading through the Psalms. And there's all sorts of material in there. Some of it is really quite violent. Dash the skulls of your enemies on the rocks, kill the babies of your enemies. I mean, really shocking, violent passages. But actually, when you go through in this way any kind of a teaching whatsoever, there is a kind of understanding that there's a lot of depth to these teachings. There's a lot of resonances with our experience. And I think, in a way, almost anything that we receive and take in is going to become Dharma for us if we're practicing, because we can extract what is helpful, what is valuable, what is good, and let go of what is not serving the purpose. And let's remember, in the Bible particularly, I would say, but also in the teachings of the Buddha, there are many, many similes, many kind of visual examples of all sorts of things, sometimes very shocking. This morning I was teaching about the nutriments, and the similes describing the nutriments are very painful. The simile of the flayed cow. This is contact, the Buddha said. It's like being a flayed cow, assailed, bitten by all sorts of creatures. How painful. So, in spiritual teachings, we may have very painful imagery, but what we can do is take it in and consider all the ways in which it can inform us. When we have violent imagery in the Psalms, they're symbolizing the path for us in different ways. They're symbolizing the battle within. The enemy is always here. It's not out there. And recognizing that, one can take in all of these images, all of these teachings, and turn them like into very positive and helpful ways in which we can understand Dharma. So yeah, I'd encourage you, anyone, to look at the Bible, look at the Quran, look at the teachings of all the different traditions and see what's there, see where the Dharma is to be found, and with discernment, take them in. But most of all, I would actually recommend the Pali Canon, because the Buddha was fortunate in that he was teaching for 45 years and people were listening to him. And some of them even understood what he was saying. I mean, it's fantastic. And not only that, but they remembered what he'd said. And it was recorded. It was passed down over so many generations, this beautiful Dharma from the Buddha. Jesus didn't have a very conducive condition for his transmission of Dharma. People didn't listen so much. He didn't have so much time to teach. And the audience was not so receptive. It wasn't a very conducive time. It was an occupied country. It was difficult for him to teach the Dharma, I surmise from his life story. And so the Buddha's teachings are more, in a way, full and complete for us because the conditions were so much more conducive in his day. And so I would really recommend the Pali Canon, because every question one could have really about spiritual practice, we can find the answers there and the guidance is there. It's very full and complete. And there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot of texts in the Pali Canon. So in a way, life's short. We don't want to spend all our time reading and studying. It's probably quite good to focus. So just to find texts that really nourish our hearts and our practice and study them deeply. Yeah, I wish you well with that.
Okay. And there's also here, Shadow of Label asks, is a monk more spiritual than a lay person?
Not necessarily. I don't want to talk about some monks that experiences that I've had with some naughty monks. Yeah. And there's some very good lay people too that have blown me away too. So
I would agree with that. I would also say that on average, the average monk is more spiritual than the average lay person. Just because in order to enter into monastic life, there has to be some kind of spiritual motivation, usually. So yeah, definitely there's monks who are not very admirable and lay people who are very admirable, and vice versa. But I would say that on average, overall, spiritual people with a really deep spirituality tend to be drawn to monastic life. And so then naturally then you'll have a slightly higher average spirituality among monks. Let's see. Oh, okay. Shadow Label apparently really likes you. Says, you're a definite person to look up to in my life. I hope you stay on Monk Chat for a few weeks more, or a few decades more would be good. Yeah. So Daniel says, can you give any practical advice on how to address the mind when experiencing envy? What do you think?
Yeah, envy is really difficult, isn't it? It's for me, when I'm feeling envious, there's a sort of feeling of a sense of incompleteness. Like it's like I wish I had this other thing that this person has and I haven't got. So I'm lacking something, and someone else has that thing. So it's a really unfortunate, painful state of mind. It's also quite, in a way, a lot of us feel shame around it, envy and jealousy. We feel really ashamed because it's like, how could I be prone to such a, disgraceful mind state? So it's really important and really great that you bring it in, because it's really important to acknowledge, yeah, we do get jealous, we do get envious, we do sometimes feel lacking, or we sometimes look over there and see someone having just the thing that we feel we could really do with. And so there it is, the envy's there, the jealousy's there. How to deal with? to recognize, first of all, yes, this is what it seems to be. This is the kind of label I can put to this state of mind. And then to meditate on it, to be present for, how does it feel? How does it feel? When I have these thoughts, can I pay more attention to what's happening in the body at this point? What's the sense? And often we can have a feeling of there's some kind of unpleasant feeling in the body. There's some suffering here. And if we can directly attend to that, it's just like with any negative mind state, if we can directly attend to the fullness of that experience right here and now, then it will start to change inevitably. And we can observe the arising of envy, and we can observe its passing away. And it may come again and again, but just to be present, to feel the discomfort, to face the dukkha very straightforwardly, is the way to work with these things. And recognizing that there isn't really anything, it's kind of a delusory state, isn't it? There's not really, how would it really be if I got that thing that I see someone else enjoying? Is it really, do I really want to take from them? Do I really want to have unfortunate feelings around this other person? And we can investigate in this way also and recognize that, no, this is something just to be present for and allow it to pass away.
And Haiyang asks, what is the most important theoretical and practical thing to know in order to realize nirvana? Impermanence. Okay, that was easy. Okay.
I'm going to try and do one word answer next time. See if I can manage it.
We used to do this during monk chat when there was a lot of questions. We would do what we called Zen answers.
It's really
try to answer everything in short phrases or even single words. It's actually fun, trying to condense an answer.
Concise, yeah.
Anyway, Joanne says, how do we stop comparing ourselves to monks and nuns in our progress, becoming disappointed?
Why would he do that to begin with? I don't understand. I don't try to compare myself to LeBron James or these incredible people. It doesn't make any sense to me to put myself in that situation. I don't try to compare myself to the other venerables. But I think, in a very practical way, what you can do is practice self-compassion. That kind of how Aya was talking about that lack. Maybe it's that sense of lack that you feel, right? There's something that you feel you don't have, but you like to see the wholesome qualities that you do have. We all have some wholesome qualities. And Bhante and Aya have wholesome qualities, more developed, or some that I don't have, and maybe I have some also in this, like that too, but it's not something to be envious about. But sometimes we don't recognize our own goodness, and that's what makes us feel a little bit envious or makes us feel like lacking. So just really investigate your own kindness, your own compassionate, loving kindness nature, and all your wholesome qualities that you have. And you'll realize that, hey, you got some pretty good things going on, and you're here and you're asking the right questions. I mean, you got that investigative, curious kind of Dhamma inclined mind. That's a very wholesome skill to have. We only have 45 people out of billions of people in the world here, so you're doing better than most of those people if they're not listening to other monks chatting on some other street or at a temple. So just focus on your own compassion and your own wholesome qualities. And I really think that in that way, this kind of comparing to others will go away.
Another thing I find really useful is recollecting that at some point over the hundreds of lifetimes before becoming the Buddha, at some point, the Buddha was exactly like you. He had exactly the same defilements, exactly the same delusion, exactly the same messed upness. And through practicing Buddhism, he didn't necessarily know it was Buddhism, but through practicing the Dhamma as best he could, he eventually became a Buddha. So that means you can as well. And you're already going in that direction. So that's actually really important to remember. It's important to remember that you're on the path to awakening, and as long as you keep moving forward, you'll get there eventually. That's the important thing. SD asks, could you talk about what the process for your ordination entailed? Do you have to pass tests or perform? Maybe. Did you have to pass any tests or perform?
No, I don't have to do exams or anything, fortunately. Different stages, and it's all really about coming and staying in monasteries and just seeing, does this actually suit me? Is this suitable for my practice? Is it going to be a benefit for me to be in a monastic community? Because initially, at least for the first 5, 7, even 10 years, it's really helpful to be part of a monastic community so we can learn how to practice well, how to practice the Vinaya, how to keep and learn about and to keep all the different rules that we have in order to help us to kind of simplify our lives and live in as harmless a way as possible. So this is something that's really valuable to learn from others who've already had experience in monastic life. And so the real kind of requirement is just a kind of interest and willingness to learn and to be willing to live a pretty selfless life in community, to let go of our own wishes and desires, and to blend in and harmonize with other people. And I guess that's the test is, are we able to do that? Are we willing to do that? Does that work for us? Do we feel comfortable and safe enough to do that? Yeah.
Okay. And that was a bit longer than one word.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Maybe the next one. I'll try.
And Sud asks, what are some of the practical ways we can develop metta towards ourselves and others outside of meditation? Does it create good karma when you have a mind of metta? Then is the converse also true when you have thoughts of anger? Despite not acting on it, just letting go, would it still create negative karma? Bhante?
Yes. So it's very clear that, our thoughts, speech, and physical actions, intentional ones, all produce vipaka, the results, right? So if our action is intentionally done with hatred, then the result, the fruit, the pala, is going to be negative. So that's one thing I always like to bring up in my Dhamma talks, because I think that sometimes we kind of make excuses for our thoughts, right? Well, like no one else knows, so I'm going to fantasize about like my friend's partner, or I'm going to fantasize about the celebrity who I know that's married, or I'm going to fantasize that I punched my boss in the face, or that I did something horrible to my neighbor. And we think, well, like I'm not actually doing it, so it's okay. But no, I mean, it's having an impact and it will produce negative karma. It's not the same as actually going through with it, right? It's not going to be the same degree, but it is producing, and you're inclining your mind towards unwholesome states. And so it's just going to eventually spill over into your words or into your physical actions. So we need to be very careful, but the best way to overcome any anger is through the opposite of anger, right? Avyapada, so like loving kindness, metta, like friendliness towards yourself. And I think if we really have this sense of recognizing that we deserve to be well and happy, and this sense of loving kindness towards ourselves, we can't hold anger towards others. I think that's why it's so important to start developing loving kindness and compassion toward oneself first, because then one can't hold that anger towards others. But if we hate ourselves, then it's going to be very easy for us to hate others. So just, look at whatever you have going on in your life, or whatever you don't like, or whatever's bothering you, and kind of give yourself a break. Like a few days ago, someone came and they were telling Bhante how they're disappointed in their practice because they got upset and they got so angry. And Bhante's response was like, of course. I mean, if all those horrible things happen to a person, it's natural that someone's going to get overwhelmed and get angry. So we have to also treat ourselves that way too. When we see that we haven't met our standards, kind of hold that with compassion, right? We don't try to kind of like justify our actions that were unwholesome, but we say, you know what, I'm not perfect yet. I'm working on it. I recognize the dangers in these unwholesome states, and I'm trying my best. And kind of view your practice in this compassionate lens instead of like having an inner drill sergeant and beating yourself up all the time, right? And I'm not good enough, and like self-flagellating yourself and all that. It doesn't work. The Buddha said no self-mortification, right? Again, we think self-mortification only means physical, but you can do it mentally. You can be doing some mental self-mortification also. So just be very careful of what you entertain in the mind, and try to cultivate more self-compassion. Be more generous, be more generous to yourself.
Great. And Anonymous asks, in Pali terms, what are the 4 feelings of the 4 jhanas? Well, the first jhana is Vivekajang Piti Sukhang, which means the euphoria and happiness produced by seclusion. So seclusion in the sense that one is secluded from unwholesome mind states. One is secluded from the hindrances and defilements. But the mind is also very bright and alert, so it's not dull or sleepy at all. The second one is Samadhi Jang Piti Sukhang. So this is the euphoria and happiness that is produced by samadhi, so the unification of mind. So this is a deeper and more refined state. So the mind is not just free of hindrances, but it's also completely unified and steady and focused. The third one, there's no PT, there's just Sukha, but I don't remember off the top of my head the Pali phrase. But at that one, it's just Sukha, so the PT is gone, there's just Sukha. But I don't remember how it's the exact term that's used. Anyway, so this is where through the deepening of one's samadhi, then the more agitating euphoric quality fades, but the mind is still extremely happy. And then the fourth one is upekkha. So this is the ultimate refinement of equanimity, where the mind is completely peaceful and still, to where it's not reacting to any sensation with either desire or aversion. So those are the feelings of the 4 jhanas. So the first 3 are increasingly refined states of euphoric pleasure. And then the fourth one is perfect serenity. Okay, we have another question for Ayabi. Do you monks experience Buddhism mixing with Christianity in the West the same as it mixed with Taoism and other religions in the East?
Not really, actually, no. I think because the theistic religions are so different. You know, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, you know, they have the central concept of God and worship of God, aligning oneself to God's will. And there are so many ways in which we could say we can understand how these religions and Buddhism can actually come together. There's a lot of ways in which we can integrate them. And I've had lots of conversations with Christian monastics about different concepts in Christianity and how we can find Buddhist concepts and kind of how they can meet to some extent, but also we're very different. And the big difference being that the Buddha wasn't encouraging us to give our responsibilities to a higher being and ask that higher being to take care of us in any way at all. So Buddhism is most definitely not a theistic religion. It's not that we don't have gods in Buddhism, it's just that the relationship is very different. The Buddha was emphasizing our responsibility for our, if you like, salvation, our redemption, and only we can do it. And of course, he showed how he was able to liberate his heart from suffering. And he's telling us, well, yeah, you can also do this. As Bhante said, the Buddha was a human being and he had all the issues and problems that we have, and he overcame them. And he knew the full extent, actually, of suffering and all the difficulties that one could have. He knew that. So the fullness of a Sammasambuddha it's one who knows the bigger picture, the full gamut, the full range of suffering. And he was a human being, we're human beings. He was telling us, you know, you can also do this. You can also liberate your hearts from suffering, and only you can liberate your hearts. No one else can do it for you. So this is a crucial difference. And actually, Christian monastics have this understanding that they have to do the work as well. But the difference is that we're not spending time giving over worship or praise or honor to any kind of God. We can respect the gods. We can recognize they have hearts and minds that are vastly superior to ours, but we can't rely on them to help us out, really. At the end of the day, it's our own job to do that. We can only we can liberate ourselves. That's not a one-word answer, sorry.
And Jojo says, I love my brother and he always wants to spend time with me. He gossips and it tends to suck me in. How should I deal with this? When I refrain from bad companionship, I'm fine, but not with bad companions. Well, it might actually be worth just directly telling him exactly that. Tell him that you really love him and you really like spending time with him, but that gossiping hurts you and makes you feel uncomfortable, and it makes you less enthusiastic about spending time with him. So just be really clear with him that you actually really want to spend time with him, but that kind of conversation is hurting you, and that you cherish the relationship with him enough that you want to work on making it as enjoyable for both of you as possible. And I think if you put that in a properly heartfelt and clear way, that there's a chance that he will understand. But also recognizing that ultimately you can't control other people. So if that's his habit, then you may not be able to change his habit. But what you can do is you can work on your own mind. So when he does start gossiping, then become hyper vigilant, recognizing, okay, I'm in really dangerous territory right now, and I need to be extremely careful in stopping myself from getting involved. And just wait and listen patiently until he's done saying whatever he's saying, and then change the topic. Talk about something else, but don't go with the gossip. Yeah, so those are my recommendations. So SD says, there are many activities that we know now are extremely beneficial for people that were not known in the Buddha's time. Best example is exercise. They didn't know about exercise in the Buddha's time. I'm pretty sure people have known about exercise since literally forever. And trust me, they most certainly were doing a lot of exercise. I mean, the monks were walking many, many, many kilometers every day. They were going for alms round in the morning, doing walking meditation in the afternoon, walking from village to village. And I mean, just people's lives back then. I mean, up until just a few decades ago, most of the world was doing subsistence agriculture, which is a lot of physical exercise. So I'm actually not so convinced that exercise is a modern invention. I'm pretty sure that's been around forever.
Yeah, there's the pictures, Bhante, they go back like thousands of years, and ancient murals of like Egyptians doing exercise, like martial arts and things like that, like as professionals, you know?
Yeah, so the ancient Greeks, they invented the Olympics.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And gymnasiums.
Yeah, like professional athletes, that was going on in ancient Greece, which was in fact the time of the Buddha. So yeah, it's nothing new. Do monks exercise? Yes, they can, and they do. Having a good, healthy body is actually a good support to your mind. So when your body is really frail and sickly, then that makes it harder to meditate well. Makes the mind a bit more blurry and difficult to work with. Okay.
Answer that question.
Well, it's technically not a question, but if you want to answer it, go ahead.
That's good.
So a string of unpronounceable letters says, Jesus taught the Dhamma, ? The concept of promising everlasting life is not in line with the Four Noble Truths. Everlasting life means that compounded things never cease, which isn't the case.
Yeah, I'm that's great you bring that in, because I don't want to confuse anyone when I say Jesus taught the Dharma. I'm not sure that the emphasis on everlasting life was necessarily a big part of Jesus's teaching, but whatever. If it's there in the Bible and it's telling us we can hope for and pray for God for everlasting life, we can say, well, okay, this is something that may not be the full picture. It may not be helpful for us. On the other hand, we can consider this teaching and just see what it does for us. But I think it's important to agree with you, and to say that, Jesus was teaching the Dhamma in the sense that he was teaching us to do good, to refrain from harm, and to purify our hearts, and to, seek, the will of God. And what does that mean for a Buddhist? To let go of one's sense of self, to be willing to investigate the Dhamma, to grow in wisdom, to practice insight. I feel that there's a lot of teachings from Jesus that are of relevance to us, and there are some teachings that we read in the Gospels that may not speak to us and may not be in tune with the Buddha's teaching. And as Bhante said, what's the crucial teaching really? It's impermanence. So thank you for bringing that in, because we can recognize impermanence. It's not so difficult. Maybe sometimes we can forget about impermanence, but let's remember the Buddha was really emphasizing this characteristic of reality, and for us to really open to that and to let go of the sense of self, to let go of any kind of grasping for eternal life or anything else. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Shadow of Label, full of questions this evening, keeping things lively, asks, is there more to Buddhism than just observing a person's state? What do you think?
Yes. Sabe papasa karanam kusalasa pasampada sachitta pariyodapana metam buddhanusasana. So avoiding all evil, avoiding doing bad things. There's where we start, Then cultivating doing good things and purifying the mind. So purifying the mind is the third of these. Developing, doing good also falls under the cultivating wholesome states and being aware. But first we start off by not harming. That's the beginning of it. And I think many Western people, I'm guilty of it too, started off backwards with meditation because I wanted to keep partying and doing all the unwholesome things that I wanted to do, but I just didn't want to be, full of anxiety and sadness. So we start off, it has like a social level, right? The actions, the words, the livelihood. It has a very deep social dimension. It has a behavioral level of your own actions. It has like a verbal level, right? And it has like an experiential level of the mind. So that's why it's complete. That's why I love the Buddha use Dhamma. It's a complete path. It has everything. It's not just therapeutic, or it's not just like a social movement, or it's not just like some physical training, or like it's not just like a mental gymnastics, like some philosophy. It's everything complete. But usually we focus on what we like, and then we think the whole path is that. But the short answer is no, it's just not that.
Okay, and Stevie says, I've been going to Sarachandra Buddha Center here in LA. Is it rude if I ask for material to take home? When we chant in Pali, I feel a bit lost, but the monks are encouraging.
Go ahead, tell them I told you to. That's my temple. Sanatana Vihari said I can have this book. You'll be fine.
Well, and actually, generally speaking, this is true for pretty much any Buddhist temple. If you go there and you actually say, like, I'm really interested, is there some material I can take home so I can learn more, then the monks will be very happy to help, usually. If you say you want to join in the chanting and you want help in chanting better, again, usually they'll be happy to help. Yeah, monks are usually pretty nice, and they're usually very happy when people want to learn how to join in the temple life. V.L. Hari Naidu asks, is there the, quote, spectrum of awareness, end quote? Don't know what that means. Is this a technical term or something? If you define the term, we might be able to answer the question. Shadow of Label asks, Bantu Siddhaso, have you found the meaning of life in your meditation and being as a monk? There is no meaning of life. Okay.
6 words.
6 words, okay. Okay, Shadow of Label says, are there Buddhist monks who practice with alcohol in their meditation and spirituality, as the stereotype Catholic monks who use alcohol to feel closer to God, like Friar Tuck?
Not Vinaya monks.
Yeah, alcohol is strictly forbidden, and for very good reason, because it directly weakens our mindfulness, our self-restraint, our wisdom. Basically, all the things we're trying to develop in Buddhism, alcohol reduces. So alcohol is basically the polar opposite of Buddhist practice. So there's a reason why it's one of the 5 precepts. It's actually really important. And on that point, Shadow of Label asks, Aya, what are your thoughts on keeping away from alcohol?
Alcohol is poison. Leave it alone. If someone gives you alcohol, we got some alcohol once in the monastery. Someone gave us alcohol, and I just tipped it down the sink. I was grateful for the generosity, but honestly, we can't give it away. We can't drink it ourselves. What's the best thing we can do? Not to throw it on the ground, because it would poison all the creatures there, just to throw it away.
Yep. Shadow of Label also asked, no, it's someone else. Oh, wow, I've gotten so used to the Shadow of Label questions. SD says, are there more specific steps to becoming a monastic? What are they? Who finally determines a person is ready to officially become a monk? So specific steps, go and live in a monastery. Live in a monastery and ask the monks there about becoming a monk. And there are no specific steps. It's really dependent upon each monastery. Every monastery has their own protocols and their own way of evaluating whether a person is a suitable candidate, or if maybe a different monastery would be more suitable, or if they need more preliminary training or practice, or if it's just not right for them at all. Like, every monastery has their own way of evaluating these things. So you might even visit several different monasteries before finding one that really works for you. Or you might just eventually realize it's just not really what you want to do this life, and that's also okay. Okay, we're running a bit low on time, and there's still many questions, so I think we're probably not going to get through everything this evening, but we'll get through a few more, I think. So Sud asks, is there an objective way to determine how far one has progressed on the path? For example, there are milestones when learning a skill. What would be milestones in knowing you are progressing on the path?
A few like desires. So you don't want many material things. You're not like looking for parties, looking for a dance, looking for particular foods. So like, yeah, when you start living like a very minimalistic life and you're not caught up in the worldly things, when people invite you to all these worldly stuff and you're just kind of like, I'll just stay home. You know, like that's, I think, a very good and clear indication that you've advanced in your practice.
Okay. And Joseph asks, how literal is the phrase freeing the heart from suffering? Is suffering rooted in the chest? Ayubi?
I think the word heart here, it often refers, when we use this word in this kind of teaching, to chitta. Chitta is the Pali word which means heart stroke mind. Like, the heart and the mind are not seen as two separate things. So the mind is actually not up here and the heart is not here, but it's the whole experience of mind and body that is, we can say, chitta. So I hope that's helpful.
Shadow of Label says, I wonder, I think what SD was wondering, if monks experience blood clots a lot more during sedentary lifestyles. So there's a monk I'd like you to talk to. His name is Tan Sutam. And he has a practice of walking 50 kilometers a day. And he walks really fast, like speed walking. So I would not call his lifestyle sedentary, and I don't think he has blood clots. He's also 60 years old, by the way. So being a monk doesn't necessarily mean that you have a sedentary lifestyle. So whether you have a sedentary lifestyle is a choice. So some monks do and some monks don't, just like some lay people do and some lay people don't. And Rick says, I've lived in healthy solitude for over 12 years with my dogs in an A-frame home, spiritual retreat, which has been a great supportive practice. As illness has progressed, I have struggled to take care of responsibilities. How do I determine whether to continue to live here or to let go and live in a place that has less demands but is less supportive of practice?
this body that we have is a precious vehicle to practice the Dhamma. And then sometimes we find ourselves in these situations where we kind of have to not compromise, but kind of try to find a balance between, our current physical capabilities to practice our Dhamma and our love for the Dhamma. So there's sometimes if your health is at risk, we want you to live. There's many occasions where monks are sick and the monks go to those monks and they tell them, please live. We want you to live. Don't die. Is there anything we can do for you? So there is an emphasis on life, on prolonging this life. One, to live the Dhamma and to share the Dhamma with others and to be an example for future generations also. Sometimes we're so used to living a certain way and practicing the Dhamma a certain way, but we can't do that anymore because we're getting older. And that's fine. That's okay. So just, that at the end of the day, the choice is yours and just do what works. And maybe a month or 6 months or a year from now, it changes and you can do more Dhamma practice and live it more like you're living today. And then go ahead and do that. So just be very flexible and just kind of work with your body and don't feel bad about these kind of like limitations. That's life. That's this body gets old and life changes. Anicca.
Okay. And VL Hari Naidu says, I want to know whether awareness varies between the extremes, i.e. is there a spectrum of awareness? Do you get what they're asking?
I'm not sure, but we can observe how awareness can be tinged, how awareness can be affected by the defilements, as we call them in Buddhism. There are certain obscurations, that can diminish our experience of awareness. So I mentioned earlier sloth and torpor, a lack of energy, restlessness, too much energy. Also desire, can cloud the mind, and aversion can upset and agitate the mind. So these hindrances, and the fifth is doubt, which can confuse and agitate the mind. These hindrances, these obscurations can actually give a sense of clouding the mind and reducing the awareness. And so we can observe in our meditation practice that the mind can sometimes be very bright and clear and focus very easily and come to a place of stillness very easily, be very discerning. Or sometimes it's a struggle, the awareness comes and goes and we might lose a mindfulness through getting distracted by these kind of obscurations that we call the hindrances. So yeah, there's a kind of spectrum in that sense. And there are degrees maybe of awareness. And as we practice meditation and also practice the Eightfold Path, because earlier there was a question about, how do you develop samadhi? Well, you develop samadhi through practicing the Eightfold Path. So there are 7 other aspects to the path: living a righteous life, avoiding unskillful speech, action, having good intention, having right view, developing samadhi. Happens through all of these ways of living and practicing right effort, right mindfulness. So, awareness is something that maybe we can grow and develop, in the sense that we can develop the ability to be insightful around our experience, to wake up to this experience that we're having, to be more mindful, to have a more peaceful mind. And so in this sense, there's a kind of spectrum of awareness. And maybe you could say on the spiritual path, we're developing greater clarity of awareness, greater degree of awareness. I don't know if that really answers your question. Probably not, but I hope it's helpful anyway.
And the last question for the evening, Joanne says, accepting anything less than spiritual perfection feels shameful and inadequate. Can you help? Yeah, so there is a very beautiful aspiration in your words, which is the aspiration for spiritual perfection. That's very admirable, and that aspiration will help you move in the direction of spiritual perfection. And one aspect of that is coming to full acceptance that your current condition is completely natural and normal. There's actually absolutely nothing wrong with you just the way you are. So that's starting with a full acceptance and tolerance and appreciation for your current condition as it is, And also recognizing that this current condition is impersonal. It's not your true being. It's not your true self. It's just a temporary condition, a temporary state, which your mind is passing through. So recognizing, okay, this is not actually who I really am. It's just what I'm experiencing right now. So then there actually isn't any problem, because you look at the mind and you see a bunch of greed and hatred and delusion, and you're like, oh, well, that's not who I am. That's just the current experience that's happening. So I don't need to be bothered or worried about these things, because that's not who I am. And you can focus your mind on moving towards spiritual perfection, and it will. And as long as you stay focused on your aspiration for spiritual perfection, then you will already have a sense of that purity, that holiness. So this is actually summarized very beautifully in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Oh, I'm going to quote Mahayana. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, one of the lines it says is, the moment you produce the aspiration for awakening, you are already a Buddha. And that's what this is talking about. Even though you're not yet completely perfect, the moment you have that inclination, that aspiration for spiritual perfection, then you already have the taste of it. You're already in contact with that perfection. And it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time.
Time.
And on the note of time, we have in fact run over time. So we didn't get to quite everything. So if you have more, please bring it next time. And for now, we'll conclude the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu.